So I don't know if I wasted my time doing this, but I basically just recorded a bunch of footage and benchmarked what is basically gaming on the equivalent of a somewhat oldish potato. Let's get into this because this is going to be really fun to try to justify doing. I don't know. This was torture. So this right here is a Dell Latitude E6410 laptop from 2010, and inside of it is some fairly good for its day specifications. Of course, upgraded in a couple of different ways, but basically equivalent. It has 8 gigs of RAM, it has a first-gen Core i5 460M processor, and it has the ill-fated NVIDIA Quadro NVS 3100m. And if anybody knows exactly what I'm talking about as far as this mobile GPU is concerned, well, you'll basically know we have the equivalent of a GeForce 210 inside this computer. Oh boy, this is not going to look good for the rest of the video, is it? Yep, 16 CUDA cores, basically identical to that of a GeForce 210, as well as a 606 megahertz clock speed on the graphics, and a 1.58 gigahertz clock speed on the memory, and there's half a gig of GDDR3 graphics memory to speak of as far as that's concerned. And it's running on a full PCI Express X16 interface. Not that that's really going to do much good, but sure, why not? And for this test, I used the newest available drivers as far as this computer is concerned, which, as you saw from the thumbnail and from right here, our driver version is 342.00. I could not get any newer drivers to install on this computer. Not that it would really make much of a difference anyway, because the whatever's in this machine is so bad that you can't even really run the desktop because it lags. It just goes to show how weak this computer really is. So there you have it. There's your specifications. And yes, I put myself through the mercy of having to record and play through, with benchmarking included, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games, all of which really aren't even that modern for that matter. I mean, the newest one is probably one of them right there. This is going to be one hell of a disappointing video, isn't it? All right, let's get off the floor and let's go review these things. Actually, before we begin, just bear with me. For today's tests, I decided instead of doing screen recording, I would record with the camera on my phone pointed at the screen, just because of the fact that it would be a little bit nicer to record than some laggy screen recording. That, and I don't think this machine would be powerful enough to actually keep up with something like that, considering the limited GPU we're dealing with here. So this was requested by some users in my Discord, so you can blame them for having to deal with the camera situation that you're looking at here pretty shortly. So our first game was Grand Theft Auto Vice City, a game that is most definitely easy to run, particularly the Steam version, which runs in Direct3D 8 mode, just like the original. And with the native resolution of the monitor, which was 1440 by 900, with basically all the settings turned on except for like half draw distance, just because I know this machine tended to struggle with that for some bizarre reason, we did only receive an average frame rate of 66.4 frames per second, with 1% lows and 0.1% lows of 35 and 2 respectively. What I will note is that this game had quite a bit of stutter, and it wasn't really reflected on the camera, but it was definitely stuttering, and it was pretty bad. So definitely, if you're going to play that game on this computer, you want to keep that in mind. Maybe lower the resolution, maybe even consider turning on the frame limiter, because this computer can definitely make use of it, and that should clean up the stutter. Here we have Flat Out, a classic bugbear title from the early 2000s, one that I remember playing a lot as a kid on the PlayStation 2. It's no surprise that this game was very easy to run with this computer. In fact, it was so easy that I could max every single setting out as far as the graphics were concerned. So texture quality was at its maximum, draw distance was at its maximum, and anisotropic filtering was at its maximum, native resolution, the whole 9 yards. And this game actually stayed fairly consistent as far as its readings were concerned, to my amazement, with an average frame rate of 51.6 frames per second. This took place across a couple of different races within the Cup, And the 1% and 0.1% lows do reflect a little bit of stutter. Really, that only takes place when you have a lot going on. I remember the second race in particular being very taxing for this computer. It would hover around the mid-30s, especially at the start of the race, and then it would actually drop and get better over time. It mainly hung around the 40s as far as the frame rate was concerned. Don't mind my crappy driving here. I really don't drive this bad in the game normally, but that's kind of the point of this game, is to drive like you're an insane person, but I digress anyway. So, while there are some fluctuations, you could probably benefit from turning the resolution down. You don't even really need to modify any of the other graphics settings. All you really have to do is change the aspect ratio to 4:3 and then change the resolution to 1024 by 768, and you'll have an absolutely fantastic experience playing Flatout 1 here on this laptop. Now that got me thinking, if Flatout 1 runs so well on this computer, I almost wonder how its sequel ran, the one that was also made by Bugbear in 2006. Well, let's take a look at the sequel, Flatout 2. Unlike Flatout 1, though, Flatout 2 was unable to be run at the native resolution. Instead, I had to drop the resolution to 1024 by 768 in order to keep all the maximum settings applied in the game, which meant very high textures, maximum draw distance, the whole 9 yards, including maximum anisotropic filtering, triple buffering, and all that good stuff. So, well, yeah, it does still look fantastic. The frame rate does suffer a little worse than that of original Flatout. So I suppose you could probably lower texture setting down to high or maybe even medium if you want to conserve some frame rate. Maybe turn off triple buffering, and you could also probably consider turning the draw distance down a little bit, which it might make sense because this game pre-renders all of its maps and there is a lot of flora on the screen. So I can definitely see that being a taxing option for this, but it's not all that bad. It's still a very gorgeous looking game despite those shortcomings, especially the frame rate, which got an average of 40.8 with a 1% low of 25.7 and a 1% low of 3.8. So absolutely playable, as long as you don't mind the console level frame rates, in my opinion, which this thing will certainly keep up with and do more than competently. So really I only have two more games that ran surprisingly well. This one is the better looking of the two, being the original Portal. I ran this at 1280 by 800 because 1440 by 900 was a no-go, and I had to turn all the settings down to the lowest except for medium textures, and I think there was a couple other settings I left on, like bloom, and I turned VSync off, which resulted in an average frame rate of 45.4, and obviously the 0.1 and 1% lows are pretty garbage because the loading screens in this game cause those, so just ignore those, they're inaccurate. But anyways, there are some troublesome spots though, for sure. Definitely the portals are troublesome areas, as you'll soon see with the frame rate here. So if you pay attention, once the time runs out and the portal opens, you'll notice that the frame rate sharply drops to like 30 or something like that. But anyways, another area where this will actually drop the frame rate is in the elevators alongside the emancipation grid. Those will actually drop the frame rate sharply as well. Otherwise, it seems like this game can handle itself, but it just has these little visual effects that tend to stumble it a little bit. So when you're inside of an open test chamber area, you can expect between 60 to 100 frames per second, but you just touch an emancipation grid or a portal, and the frame rate is just poo. So definitely something to keep in mind with this game, and I don't expect Portal 2 to run any better than this one, for obvious reasons. I didn't test Portal 2 though, so oops. That's okay. Another game that ran surprisingly well was the original Grid by Codemasters, one that was released in 2007. This game actually played pretty well, although I will say the visuals were rather nasty. As you can tell, the MSI Afterburner interface is absolutely massive on the screen. That's because I had to run this game at 640 by 480. Yes, I went that low in resolution just so I could get this game to work for you all. And unfortunately, that also resulted in me having to use the lowest in-game preset as well, which actually helped in my favor, giving us an average frame rate of 48.4 frames per second with the opening level when you drive a high-performance car and you're faced against multiple opponents on the racetrack. And the 1% and 0.1% lows are definitely reflective of some stutter when the GPU just got overloaded and couldn't keep up with all the visual elements on the screen. And honestly, you don't have that happen all too much, and it's honestly surprising that this computer can play this game. I've seen some other machines which actually had more powerful graphics than this thing actually get tripped up, but in all transparency, it was Intel integrated graphics, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it. But still, if you don't mind the potato visuals, or you could probably hook this up to a CRT and run it at the same 640 by 480 resolution, and you'd actually have yourself a surprisingly nice experience playing this game. So, I guess in the end it's all decent enough. It's not the worst, so I don't know. Leave your thoughts down below in the comments if you think this is playable. And this is where the results start getting nasty. Here's 2013 Tomb Raider, and unfortunately this game is not playable with this computer. Even with the settings turned down as low as they would go, as you can see in the benchmark, it's just not having it. With an average frame rate of 18.2, with a 1% low of 13.1, and a 0.1% low of 11.9. Yeah, this is not a very playable experience. In fact, I think the maximum it topped out at all during this benchmark test was 23. So, I don't think this game is worth playing on this computer. You're probably going to have to look elsewhere. And I don't know if that's just due to drivers or the fact that this GPU really just sucks that much. I'm just going to lean it on the latter, being that the GPU just sucks that much, because, ouch. Another title that I put a lot of faith into, but unfortunately got disappointed with, was Golf with Your Friends. I did my typical benchmark test that I've been doing with this latest version, which is using the Worms map, which is the most intensive inbuilt map in the game at the cost of the workshop content, because obviously I don't use workshop content for benchmarks. And I used pretty much as low as the game would let me go without going into the custom settings, which was the low preset, and a resolution of 640 by 480. And I know that the system really doesn't show the 640 by 480 resolution very accurately, but believe me, it wasn't 640 by 480. Everything was very blurry, very chunky, so you could bet your butt I could not see what I was doing. So, while the frame rate was alright, it definitely fluctuated badly, and this was reflected with this map having all the visual effects, all the explosions, all the items on the screen. This is a good benchmark test, and unfortunately this laptop just could not keep up with it. It barely had 30, but it's so stuttery, and it frequently drops into the low 20s, and it stays that way, and it's not very pleasant. I'm sure that if you were to use other maps, it would be fine, but really, who's going to selectively play maps that get good frame rates on a computer that can barely play the game to begin with? That just doesn't make any logical sense in my opinion. So, unfortunately, this game is a no-go. And finally, to wrap up this list of benchmarks, we have Left 4 Dead 2, a game that I was recently gifted by a Steam friend, so thank you very much for that. I appreciate it very much. So, with this, I was actually having some real high hopes for it. I would think that it would run really well, just because of the fact that this game is rather dated, but still fairly well played by some people, especially in my friend's library. But I digress. Anyway, with this game set to 800 by 600 and the lowest in-game presets for all the options, at least the ones that make sense, it really didn't help the frame rate all that much. You can see in some indoor areas, like right now it's at 60 frames per second, but then it just fluctuates randomly and it swings between 30 and 60, and it's really bizarre. I don't know what the deal is. I'm not sure if that's the game that's doing the capping of the frame rate or if it's the graphics card, because the graphics card usage definitely gets dropped when it gets stuck at 30 frames per second. So it could be the game engine doing it, but I will highly doubt it, because when you're inside of the action, you'd want the frame rate to stay up. So I'm almost betting you that this is some weird thing with the graphics card in this computer not able to keep up with this game, unfortunately. Although, during the times that it was able to turbo up to 60 frames per second, it was fine. It could actually do it alright. So, I don't know what was going on. Somebody's going to have to chime in the comment section below and tell me what I was missing, because I swear I think this machine can play this game just fine, but I must have been missing something. Either way, I digress. The settings for this, like I mentioned, again, were all the lowest ones, so that resulted in a frame rate of 35.5 frames per second on average, with 1% and 0.1% lows that looked pretty close together. So while it was heavily swinging in frame rate between 60 and 30, there really wasn't much stutter at all. In fact, it stayed well composed throughout the entire time of me playing it. So you could, if it wasn't so dang fluctuative between 30 and 60 frames per second, you could probably get away with playing this game just fine. There wouldn't be really any issues with it. It's just something bizarre with it. So I would have to give this thing a hard pass, because if you're doing a competitive online match or you're playing through the co-op story, you're going to have a bad time with this computer, unfortunately. It's just too drastic of a change, and it happens so frequently that it's just not worth playing on this.
And there you have it. Pretty disappointing results from a machine that, honestly, I guess I was expecting pretty terrible results from as far as the gaming was concerned. And in all transparency, this is not a gaming laptop. This is meant to be more of a workstation, hence the NVS graphics card. Well, I mean, it's still a GeForce 210, so it's not really going to do much of anything, really. Let's not beat around the bush, but at least it's got some form of drivers for some optimized workloads. I have no idea what this would be used for anymore, and particularly because of the fact that the graphics driver is barely Windows 10 compliant. It was released basically around the time of its launch, and that was the last one that NVIDIA ever released. So, yeah, it's a pretty hunk of crap GPU, but to say the least, it works, and it works in Windows 10. Can't say the same about Linux, honestly, but I don't know. Maybe that'll be another video for another day, but I doubt it. So, with that having been said and shown, hopefully you all got a kick out of this. Don't use one of these things for gaming. They're not worth it. Hopefully that encourages some better spending habits as far as these machines are concerned. But I'm digressing. So, let's go ahead and wrap this video up, and I'm going to get out of here. So, if you like this video, thumbs up. Of course, if you didn't like it, well, this other button, which looks like this, also works. And subscribe if you want to see more content just like this one, or better content even, depending on what comes out. And, well, with that having been said, I'll see you all in the next video.